Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review, and it's Friday, the 21st of June, 12:30 p.m. my time, which is Mountain Time, so it's 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, which is the time I'm used to because I was born and raised in Ottawa and lived most of my life in Toronto. I had a request to show a little bit more video of where I live, so there's a little bit of the rain day yesterday. But you can see my backyard is a pure wilderness of thousands of square kilometers of rugged mountain jungle with no civilization back there other than Quebecer natives. So that's where I live. This is where I live. And it's a beautiful place to live. I'm not sure showing a lot of videos is a good idea because people will just, I don't know, maybe feel bad or something. So today we're going to move on with Stardust Ranch, and I'm just going to kind of walk through the chapters and talk about stuff that happened maybe behind the scenes that didn't make it into the book, and just give you a fuller understanding. And those of you who've read Stardust Ranch may enjoy this quite a bit. Those of you who haven't read it, what are you waiting for, man? I mean, I don't ask for money. I don't have a Patreon account. Buy a book. That's how you support my podcasting, is buy a book. So, but at this stage, I would say The Devil in Us is more important for this particular moment in history. Yeah, let me speak to that a little bit now, because before we get into the Stardust stuff, it's really heating up now. There are people openly talking about nuclear war now. My sense is that that's not going to happen. Okay, it's not going to be allowed to happen. And also, there's another thing that people are really not remembering, and that is that nuclear weapons can be deployed now that are radiation free, or the radiation is gone in like 24 hours, and so there's no big fallout death afterwards. The sort of, other than the explosive power, and these bombs are so powerful now, like one nuclear warhead could take out the greater New York area. It would kill millions. And I'm not saying that like General Ripper and Dr. Strangelove, that nuclear war is a tenable thing, that we could, maybe win it. There's talk about the elites going underground and just nuking everything because they just don't give a shit at this point. I mean, would you want to be caught and hung out to dry for the things I talked about in The Devil in Us? Would you want to be walked in front of the human race as a baby killer? Okay? No. And these people, they're at a certain point, they're suicidal, right? Like, they have no respect for life. Anti-life is anti-life. Satanism, as we understand it, which is not really Satanism, which I went out of my way to explain in The Devil in Us, A Memoir of You and Me. The entity we call Satan has no allegiance whatsoever to these groups that call themselves satanic. So, but they're anti-life. They're jungled up with extraterrestrials. But I think it's all been taken care of on the other side. That the divine has worked it out, and the agents of the divine, and anybody and anything can be an agent of the divine. Extraterrestrials can be an agent. An agent of the divine is just a sentient being that understands universal moral law, the spiritual laws of vibration that govern the realities, and is respectful of life, grateful for life, and in a loving relationship with the creative principality, the creator of all creators, okay? Which again is not an individual that can be anthropomorphized. But the creator can be represented through gods. I did that podcast, God and Gods. So, I mean, I don't see any big problem with working with gods, as long as you remember that the principal role of a human being is to unify with the creator. And but if the gods help you do that, then why wouldn't you work with them, okay? Beings help me all the time. They don't even identify themselves, right? But I get help all the time with these books, with all kinds of things. There's various higher order beings on other dimensions helping me. I don't I don't really like the language of the New Age or anything like that. Your guardians and all of this near-death experience language and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I know they're there. I know they help me. I know they have my back. I don't abuse it. And but when you're doing good in the world, and these books are doing good, good forces align with you and protect you and help you and give you inspiration and create a kind of pathway to the creative energies. That's the way I see it, anyways. So, anyways, getting back to the situation at hand there. So, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think this is the end for Team Dark. I think most of the damage they can do, they've already done, and it's quite dire. You know, quite dire indeed, especially with the medical stuff. That's going to be quite serious in the coming decade. You're going to see all kinds of infirmities, incapacitations of people, bedridden people, people with heart conditions, people with massive blood clots, and people just straight up dying. And not old people, right? Because remember, the technology works slowly but consistently in the human body, continuing to produce these negative materials, which at some point will have a catastrophic effect on health. I don't mean to, bum you out if you went along with the medical regimen to keep your job or something. I have friends who've done that. I don't mean to bum you out, but it is what it is. And this is what we're up against. This is dark as anybody can imagine. And the only reason they've scraped along this long is that we, through our religious instruction, have been infantilized about darkness. You have to understand darkness as part of a spiritual outlook, okay? That's why I write books like The Light of Darkness and The Devil in Us. Yes, they're dark books. Am I a dark person? No. Do I understand darkness? Yes. Have I been into the darkness? Yes, absolutely. It's our human right to go anywhere we want to go if we have the consciousness and the merit to experience it and have the lesson. The universe opens up for us. You can go into the dark regions, okay? And dark regions are where life begins. They're the earth of creation. Just like the soil is where our food comes from, the dark world is where life begins. It's where the life germinates, okay? It's where the God force comes in, plants its seeds, and produces things that grow into light-based beings. And everything in the life spectrum is light-based. We are a form of light muted down into matter, but we're light. We recognize ourselves through light, sunlight in this case, but light nonetheless. Our inner lives, if we have awakened imagination, are illuminated by the inner light, okay, which is the God force, which is a purer light. If you dream, you have inner light. If you can imagine clearly, you have inner light. But at a certain point in your spiritual journey, it'll translate into a much clearer light and a pure light. And it'll be as an object force, not as an aspect of your imagination. It'll be an object force. All right, that's quite an intro. It's just, boy, I'm watching these videos like Scott Ritter and the former UN arms inspector and the former Marine colonel, I think he was, and General Douglas McGregor, who have become two powerful voices in the alternative media. And I'm telling you, man, this Ukraine thing is just a fiasco. That has been nothing more than a depopulation of that country, more killing of white Christians, and a population that is on the hit list for the Zionists for whatever reasons, historical anti-Semitism and stuff like that, But we're playing a game now that is just, it's like the final part of a chess match. The checkmate is coming. It looks dark. I'll give you that. It looks really dark. It looks really spooky, but don't be afraid, okay? And even if it is the end, who cares? Let me tell you something. If you live honestly, sincerely, and pursue the Creator, your death is a reward. Okay? Death is always a reward. This is the hard part, being in the body. On the other side, it's much easier. Just get as much done as you can while you're in a body, because there's reasons that the body was created, spiritual reasons, and there's a lot of work, a lot of really good, extraordinary spiritual work that can be done within a body. So that's why the body is important, okay? All right, onward. So John moves in to Stardust Ranch, and now he's got to get everything sort of set up, everything hooked up, right? This is 1997. So the first thing he notices that's odd is there's about 30 phone lines going into the house. Like 30 different phone lines. Not jacks for one line, but 30 different phone lines going into the house. He thinks to himself, this is odd, right? So he calls, I think it was Bell Southwest was the company he was dealing with, and he calls them to get a phone line installed. He gets an appointment, takes a half day and waits for the guy. Guy never shows. Calls Bell Southwest, they apologize, set up another appointment in a few days. John puts aside a half day, because it's like a half day, like we'll be there either between 8 and noon or 1 and 5. You get either morning or afternoon, but no more specific than that, okay? So second day, second half day, he has to wait around. They never show, okay? Calls up again. He's starting to get, a little bit annoyed. Like he's had 2 appointments and they never showed. So he calls Bell Southwest again, and this time he says, look, I need to speak to a manager. He gets transferred to some lady, and to John's surprise, she doesn't give him the runaround. She says, look, there's a problem with your address. And the way our company works is we work with subcontractors. They're not employees of our company. And there's a kind of a ticketing system. And so addresses will come up for an install, and these guys can pick and choose whether they're going to do a call or not. And so we send the information to them. I forget how they did it back then. I don't think cell phones were a huge thing in 1997. They were just sort of coming into vogue back then. And so they would send these guys a message and say, look, you got to do 14,700 South Tuttle Hill Road. And they just kept not showing up. And so the manager, she levels with John and she says, look, here's the problem. We can't control our subcontractors. And when they realize where this address is, they don't want to go. And John's like, what? What are you talking about? What's wrong with my house? Why wouldn't they want to come here? And the lady says to John, your house has something of a reputation. And John's like, what? Like, what do you mean a reputation? A reputation is something a girl gets in high school or a home renovator gets from doing good or bad work. What do you mean a reputation? She says they're afraid. They're afraid to go to your house. And John says, oh my God, like why? She says, well, it doesn't really tell him much. Just gives him the basics. Like, people are afraid of your house, okay? Now remember, John's new to this area. He's new to Buckeye. He doesn't know the reputation of Stardust Ranch. He doesn't know what's happened on the property. He doesn't know anything, okay? So the lady says, look, I'm going to make sure somebody gets out to see you. And she sets a new appointment. And in this instance, the dude does show up. Shows up in a white cube van, gets out of the car. And John says he's looking at the guy from the front bay window, and the guy's like looking around really kind of skittishly, nervously. And he's the way John described it, he was looking around like he expected like big dogs to come out and attack him, okay? And it doesn't happen, okay? So the guy comes up, knocks on the door, John shakes his hand, invites him in, and they start talking. And this guy's been doing this job for quite a while. I think he's in his 50s at this point in 1997. And he's been in the area and doing the job for a while. And he knows the whole history of the house. So he tells John. He says, okay, the house was built in 1977, and it was built by a guy who built it as a anniversary gift for his wife. They had another house, and he didn't tell her he was building this house, and he just went off and bought the land and built this big 5-bedroom ranch. And when he brought his wife out to see it, she said, I'll never live there. She had a very bad feeling, like Joyce Edmonds had the same feeling when they were looking at the house. It was John who sort of pressured her into buying the house. And the guy and his wife did end up living there for a short period of time, but true to her word, she did divorce him. She didn't want to live there. And so he ended up selling the house. And the next people, or the next party to buy the house, was an off-track betting organization, hence the 30 phone lines in the house. And it was a brothel. It was a whorehouse. So they were doing off-track betting, so basically a big bookie operation. And it was a brothel. They were running whores there. And that went on for quite a while. I think that place was probably one of the longest tenants that lived there. And it's interesting because that energy probably would have blended right into the negativity that was there, right? And anyways, they ended up leaving. And then something else happened, okay? Now, I need to set this up because this is a part of, I guess you would call it Arizona lore, or actually U.S. lore now too, as well. It's like part of the U.S. So I've prepared for this, and take a look at this. I think it's about 11 minutes.
Over 2 decades ago, an Amtrak train derailed in the middle of the Arizona desert, and investigators found it had been sabotaged. But who did it and why? That remains unsolved tonight.
Our Brianna Whitney tracked down people who were involved and never before seen evidence in tonight's True Crime Arizona.
It was about 1:30 in the morning, and I was laying on a couple seats. It was like pitch black out there, so the only light there was the moon, and if I remember correctly, it was a full moon. We just came to a real, quick. I mean, it was like a jolt, hear all the crashing, and it threw me to the floor.
October 5th, 1995, the Sunset Limited Amtrak train was traveling along these tracks. 250 passengers in the middle of the Arizona desert. No electricity and no civilization in sight. Nobody knew where they were or what had just happened. And nobody knew they were now the victims of a calculated crime that would make headlines around the world.
I had just enough battery to make a call home. That's pretty much all I had.
Luann Zulawski had boarded the train in Texas, heading back home to LA when the train suddenly went off the tracks.
It felt almost like being shook to your feet by an earthquake.
And miles away, in the then small town of Buckeye, was Patricia Bory, the lone emergency dispatcher that night.
It was a quiet night until Maricopa County Sheriff's Office came up on our radio.
Fire department.
We have an emergency Amtrak train.
It was a nightmare because it was so far out in the middle of nowhere.
Tell me the milepost again.
847.0.
It would take hours to get emergency crews out to the remote location.
We called every ambulance company. We had to stage everybody all along the route to direct all the ambulances. We had to contact farmers that had road graders to grade the road out towards the railroad track, grade out an area for a trauma center.
With no GPS technology, she made a decision.
They're navigating all this in the dark.
Exactly. Yes, we had to get lighting out there.
Soon, the area was lit up in red and blue.
You could just hear the helicopters coming, and they were just one right after the other, and they were landing them. All the lights and the blinking lights from the sirens.
Luann's passenger car didn't have any major injuries, but just ahead, a grisly scene. Amtrak worker Mitchell Bates was killed, caught between the cars when they collapsed over the bridge. 75 others injured, 12 critically, with children on board.
A MASH evac zone is basically what it looked like.
Luann says that's when an engineer came running into their car.
And they asked if anybody had a camera, and I said, yeah, I have a camera. He said, well, come with me. And he says, I need you to take a picture of this part of the track. And so we got down on our bellies, and I got my camera with the flash, and I took some pictures that they asked me to take. And it turned out that it was actually the point of derailment. So at that point, I kind of knew.
The Sunset Limited had been sabotaged.
In my 30 years in the FBI, the worst crime scene I ever saw.
Larry McCormick, now retired, was second in command at the FBI in Phoenix at the time and headed out to the scene as soon as headquarters called.
We are very confident and very sure that we will solve this crime.
I'd call it organized chaos because there were so many rescue people there. I'm amazed more people weren't killed, to be honest with you, looking at the scene.
The investigation began into who did this and why. And it didn't take long until the first clues were found.
Was there any leads at that point?
Well, they had found some notes that indicated it was a domestic terrorism type of case.
These 8x10 typewritten notes were found on the ground, held down by rocks, that said the group responsible for the crime were the Sons of Gestapo. And the reason why they did it was to retaliate against the FBI and ATF for their involvement in the 1993 Waco siege.
We are also seeking all information that anyone might have regarding the Sons of the Gestapo.
Who are the Sons of Gestapo?
The actual manifestos were signed by the Sons of Gestapo. However, to date, we still haven't been able to verify that they are an actual group.
Special Agent Michael Lum is on the FBI task force currently working the case.
Was it calling for retaliation against these agencies? Why would that involve the Amtrak train?
I don't know. They went after, it was a terrorist event. They went after civilians who were just going about their everyday life.
Do you think they wrote that to try to throw you off?
That's a very good possibility.
But those responsible didn't just sever the tracks.
They cut this electrical wiring and rewired it so the warning lights that would tell an engineer to stop the train because something was wrong never flashed. There was no way to see this coming.
Even had the engineer seen it at the last moment as he's going over it, he wouldn't have had time to actually stop.
Whoever did this had to have some sort of knowledge of the train tracks themselves.
I would think so, yes.
At this point, Pat is still trying to coordinate getting crews in and out of the scene.
You've got to make the phone calls, get the people the help that they need.
When she found out the train was deliberately sabotaged, it was an emotional blow.
Like, why would anybody want to hurt totally innocent people? You know, I mean, it's a sick person.
We are also seeking...
Days later, investigators held a press conference. They had another lead.
This individual, we don't know whether it was male or female, was observed shortly after the derailment. One passenger, one employee of Amtrak observed this individual.
But they were running into one big challenge. There wasn't much evidence left at the scene from the perpetrators, and to this day, the FBI won't reveal much about what was out there.
I had read something about a pry bar or a crowbar being found at the scene and possibly missing from a volunteer fire department nearby. Is that credible?
There are a lot of rumors, and again, I don't want to get into those rumors because some of them actually could relate to do relate to the active investigation.
But Luann's 35mm camera answers my question loud and clear.
And here was a piece of metal that was left on, and I don't know if they had used that to pry something or what.
The once chaotic crime scene.
How you feeling? You okay now?
Now the center of a case gone quiet and cold. Larry fears after all these years, there may never be justice for Mitchell Bates and the injured passengers.
As time passes, it gets much more difficult to solve these cases. People's memories go, people die.
But the FBI says improved DNA and forensic technology could break the case wide open.
Can you confirm there are active leads right now?
There are active leads right now.
Michael says there were only 5 to 6 hours between the last train that successfully crossed that track and the sabotage of the Sunset Limited. This crime was planned by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing and where they would do it. And one question triggered a long, cautious pause at the FBI.
Do you believe it was some former disgruntled worker?
That's a detail I can't really get into right now.
Thousands of days have gone by and thousands of dollars remain unclaimed. For Luann, that fateful night in the train was eerie and unforgettable, and she believes eventually someone involved will fall off track and get a one-way ticket to prison.
It may not be in my lifetime, but somebody's going to say something. If they do find them, it's still murder.
All right, there you go. And quite a story it is, and it remains unsolved. Okay, so look, when the government can't solve a crime like this, it's because the government did it, okay? Here's the note. I'm going to read it from the book. This was the actual note they found. Indictment of the ATF and the FBI. Before dawn, the women awoke to say their morning prayers. The women slept upstairs. They lit their kerosene lamps because the electricity had been turned off by the FBI. After observing lights in all the upstairs windows, the FBI ordered the tear gas bombardment. Afterwards, only 2 upstairs windows were lit. The location of each was recorded. Over the next few hours, ventilation holes were poked into the walls. These holes made the fire burn very much faster. Otherwise, the fire department would have had time to put out the fire before the women and children died in the flames. At noon, the light from the 2 kerosene lamps was obscured by bright sunlight. Everyone had forgotten about them except the man who carried their locations written on a scrap of paper in his pocket. He ordered the tank drivers where to crash through. Guess under which 2 windows. He ordered them to raise their guns. As they backed out, the guns were lowered. The videotape shows clearly the floor being raised by the tank 1.5 feet. Guess what happened to the kerosene lamps in the rooms above the tanks? A minute afterwards, black smoke started to pour out of the windows where the lamps had burned. This is the normal time needed for a kerosene fire to build up. Who is policing the ATF, FBI, state troopers, county sheriffs, and local police? What federal law enforcement agency investigates each and every chokehold killing committed by a police officer, each and every beating of a drunk, whether or not a passerby videotapes it, each and every shooting of a police officer's wife who knows too much about drug kickbacks, each and every killing at Ruby Ridge? The Gestapo accounts to no one. This is not Nazi Germany. All these people had rights. It is time for an independent federal agency to police the law enforcement agencies and other government employees. Signed, Sons of the Gestapo. So the whole, obviously that's referring to Waco, Texas. Now this goes back to those colorful days of that hideous bitch, Janet Reno, and that absolute perverted lech, Bill Clinton, the coke hound, the pussy hound, the serial rapist and lip biter, Bill Clinton, okay? Just the kind of freak they like in power because there's nothing he can do to contradict what they tell him to do because he's such a compromised individual morally and in terms of public reputation that he has to do whatever they tell him to do. And that's the kind of people they like. You know, remember the podcast I did, Punks Are the Children of Prostitutes? Well, you know, when I talked about Macron and Trudeau, it's the same thing. This has been going on for a while now. Now, this program that we're in now, the destruction of the West, this program really began after we won the Cold War, and it started almost immediately. And they began to fan the flames of white nationalism as the greatest domestic threat in the United States. White nationalism, okay? Even though there were no events related to white nationalism that attacked or contradicted the government's authority. They've just been doing this for like 30 years now. So the Sunset Limited train derailment was October 5th, 1994. That was right around the time I came back to Canada from Taiwan. Now, here is where things get really interesting. Why am I telling you all this about a train derailment in Arizona when I'm talking about Stardust Ranch? John told me that the sons of Gestapo, whoever they were, had lived at the ranch and had turned it into kind of a compound. The way biker gangs will take over a house and fortify it and turn it into a compound. And John told me there was some form of standoff, and they were all killed, is what I was told. Now, this never made the news anywhere, and as you can see by that news report, like done in 2020, I think, only 4 years ago, this crime has never been officially solved. Now, there may have been some kind of community, probably Christian, living at the ranch and living peacefully. And I think what was done to people like Ruby Ridge, like Waco, and government abuses, and the myth of white nationalism, which, I mean, if you're going to deal with racial crime, the last people on the list you would address are white people. White people are generally the most law-abiding people on the planet, okay? There's no mafia in white Protestant culture. There is in Catholic culture. But Catholic culture goes back a lot longer, right? So you've got the Irish mob, you've got the Italian mob. Catholics produce mafias. They produce organized crime, okay? To my knowledge, Protestants don't. Now, that may be because they're making all their money on Wall Street and they don't need to rob because they're already robbing legally, you know, George Soros style. Who knows, right? So I decided that I was going to dig into this because that's what I do, right? I have a journalism degree. I know how to research. I know how to call people up and ask them questions, introduce myself, say, hi, my name's Bruce McDonald. I'm writing a book on Stardust Ranch. So I did. I called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And at this time when I wrote the book in 2019, Joe Arpaio was still working. I called the office and I said, look, I'd like some information on the Sons of Gestapo. Did you ever locate them? I have reports that there was a shootout at 14,700 South Tuttle Road. You know, a place that's called Stardust Ranch. It's a bit famous, and everybody knows it. Like, everybody in the police department knows it. And I got this huge runaround. So I was told by the desk sergeant to call somebody in records. So I called the records department. I have free unlimited North American calling on my Skype number, so I can call anywhere in North America. And it's really, I highly recommend it, by the way. It's like $6 a month. And from your computer, you can call anybody. So it's pretty cool. So I called the records department, and I mean, he didn't even look. He didn't even say, okay, give me a day, I'll get back to you. He said, the only way you're going to get information on what happened is if you can find one of the detectives that are still working who were around in 1994 and went through the whole investigation. And he gave me the number of a division where some of the senior detectives or the senior officers, I'm not sure sheriff's departments have detectives like police departments, but he gave me the number to call. So this is the third number I've called. The first one is just the general Maricopa County Sheriff, the desk sergeant. Then I go to records, and records transfers me over to this division. And I call and I say, are there any detectives working there who are still on the force since 1994 who would have been around when the Sunset Limited was derailed? And you know, you saw in the news story, the closest town was Buckeye, Arizona. And Buckeye was a very sleepy little town back then. It's not as big as the pictures I showed you yesterday. So this guy takes my name and my phone number, and he's kind of jovial, actually. He asks me a bunch of questions like, oh, what kind of writer are you? And I said, well, this is, you know, generally I've done fiction, adult literary fiction most of my life, but this is a nonfiction project on Stardust Ranch. I'm writing a chapter on the history of the ranch now, and this is the most curious thing I've come across, because I've spoken to people in Buckeye who've told me there was a shootout at the ranch and people were killed Waco style. So I can't report to you whether this happened or not. Okay? There's no conclusion to this. So this may be an undocumented Waco type situation where they went to a place and killed a dozen people, probably including women and children, if it happened. And I'm not saying it did, okay? But there's a possibility it did. And I would say even a probability that it did. But that's as close as I'll come to saying that it happened, because I don't know. And I don't want to spread misinformation, but the whole story is just so weird. Okay? It would not be hard to solve a train derailment with the power of the federal government, with the FBI, the ATF, and all the federal agencies. They would be able to find who did this. Instead, all they find is some hand-fisted note alleged to be Sons of Gestapo. And what a name, the Sons of the Gestapo, right? What a weird name. I mean, if you're going to try to avoid the label of a white nationalist organization, why would you use Nazi terminology like Gestapo? Just none of it makes any sense. So I told John Edmonds what I was going to do. And because we were talking daily. And after I would talk to him, if I had any follow-up research to do, I would call the other people. So I called him and I told him the next day. I said, hey, I called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department yesterday. He goes, well, I suspected. I said, what do you mean you suspected? He said they came out and visited me. And they just drove by, parked in front of the ranch, like 2 cars. They just park there. They don't walk down the driveway to talk to him or anything. Now, this is not a normal thing, right? So you've got 2 Maricopa County sheriff's vehicles. They're generally SUVs. And they come right to the front gate you see there in the picture on Stardust Ranch, and they just park there. And they ominously sit there for 20 minutes. And then they did it again later in the day. And this is after me calling the desk sergeant, the records department, and the division where the oldest members of the Maricopa Sheriff's Office still work, who might have been there in 1994. And this is all in 2019. Okay? 33 years later. That would be a pretty long police career if there were still people there. And I was very clear in my desire. I said that, if necessary, I'll make a access to information request. I'll pay the $74 US. I'll file the papers. Okay? And they just did not want to help me at all. At all. Those are your public servants. Now it gets weirder. That night, after the police officers were in front of John Edmonds' house, he got hit by what he thinks was a directed energy weapon. He said everything in his kitchen went white like a thunderbolt hit. He was knocked unconscious. And when he woke up sometime later, like 30, 40 minutes later, from being rendered completely unconscious from some kind of weapon, every piece of electrical equipment in his kitchen had been fried. He had a new fridge, a new stove, a new microwave. The insurance claim, because he had home insurance, the insurance claim was over $5,000. They sent a claims adjuster out twice, and they interviewed John because they couldn't believe it. Like, there's nothing wrong with your circuitry. Your electrical installation is up to code. There were no power surges in the area, otherwise neighbors would have felt it as well. And they accused him of deliberately frying his own equipment. And his response to that was, why would I do that? Like, I'm not asking for cash. I'm asking for the equipment to be replaced under warranty and under my homeowner's insurance. So why would I do that? Why would I fry a microwave, a fridge, and a stove? Just to be without them for an indeterminate period of time, only to have them replaced by the same make and model when they're perfectly functioning. Why would I do that? And the insurance adjuster, of course, had no answer to that question. And they ended up fulfilling the insurance claim. But John has all kinds of weird stories like this. Another thing that happens at the ranch is you have to change batteries in vehicles twice a year. All the batteries go dead after 6 months. The car won't turn on. Now, a normal battery will last for years. You don't have to change a battery for 5 years or more. But in every vehicle John had at his ranch, he was changing batteries every 6 months. Something was draining the battery power. So this is the kind of stuff that would happen when you were working with John Edmonds. John Edmonds was the ultimate shit magnet. If it, it's the buzz in the back of my head until the white light came in and cleaned everything out for me to allow me to finish the book. It's the portals opening up in my house, the blood portals. It's just high weirdness all through the writing of this book. And then if the supernatural stuff, the paranormal stuff isn't enough, then you've got creepy police services like the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department parking in front of the ranch in intimidation style after I called them for information on the Sons of Gestapo from 1994, under access to information. And they did not fulfill my request. So this, if you go back to that time as well, this is when Janet Reno and Bill Clinton and the administration, and the Biden administration is very much a continuation of that ideal. Very anti-white, very anti-Christian. Some of you listening to me may not be old enough to remember this. It might be a little bit of a mystery to you, but this was going on. Look up Waco, Texas. It was a massacre. Look up Ruby Ridge. Some guy, retired military veteran, living peacefully in nature with his family, and the whole family gets killed in a federal raid. And then you get all of this rhetoric about white nationalism and white terrorism, and it really doesn't exist. None of it exists. Like I think that that thing that happened in North Carolina when Trump got elected, where David Duke showed up and some of his followers, I think that's all staged. I think David Duke is a CIA asset. I think he's a fucking punk piece of shit, an agitator, an agent, an operator. And his job is to make it look like violent domestic white nationalism exists in the United States. I'm not saying it doesn't. Like, I know that Aryan nations exists in the prison system, but in prison you have to form gangs around race. That's the only way you survive. And I don't think Aryan nations carries out into the world that much as a significant criminal force. They might operate a little bit in the Southwest and California, but I don't think that there's a big footprint there. There's militias. But I mean, there's militias all over the world. The Iranian National Guard is a militia. It's not part of the formal military structure of the nation of Iran, IRGC. So there are militias. There are people who train with weapons. And remember Timothy McVeigh as well. That was like the early 90s, right? I mean, I think that was also after I came back from Taiwan. So that would have been 94 or 95. You've got the federal building in Oklahoma bombed by Timothy McVeigh. And that was clearly an inside job, an operation, a false flag. Okay? So they started this back in the 90s, and they're still doing it now. I mean, for the first 2 years of his term, so 2020, 2021, and part of 2022, all that fucking idiot Joe Biden could say was the greatest threat to peace and stability in the United States was domestic white terrorism. Official statements from the FBI and the ATF and all the official agencies was domestic white terrorism. And they were saying that because the only people who were picking up on the invasion at the border and the replacement theory were white people. So they had to discredit them. Not anymore. Now it's Latinos, like domesticated American Latinos who've been there since the beginning of the 20th century. Their grandparents or great-grandparents came in the 1920s. They're Americans. They speak Spanish at home, but they speak fluent English. They're not immigrants. They're noticing it too. You can find stuff on YouTube and X now, like, it looks like we're being replaced. You've got the gang leaders, the black gang leaders in the projects in Chicago, watching 700,000 Venezuelans being dropped off in Chicago, saying out loud, we're being replaced. And this is why they're not banging the drum of white nationalism anymore. It was because they didn't want that idea of what the plan was to get out. And it goes all the way back to 1994 here, and it very curiously crisscrosses with Stardust Ranch. Very interesting. Now, one more story about the history of the ranch, and this is quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so after the Sons of Gestapo, a Mexican family bought the ranch, and the telephone installer didn't have all the details on how many people were in the family. They started a cattle operation and ran it successfully for a few years, and they specialized in veal, the young beef. And on the day of the high school graduation for their son, he put a shotgun in his mouth and blew his head off. So, more blood on the ranch. So John told me it was his understanding, and I trust John, okay, that there was a massacre on the ranch before the Mexican family, the Sons of Gestapo, was massacred. I don't even think they were called the Sons of Gestapo. It was probably just Christian people living communally in nature, which apparently the U.S. government doesn't like. You can set up a hippie commune. You can do Burning Man. I mean, if they set Burning Man up as a semi-permanent institution and set up bathrooms and showers and people lived out there 12 months a year, I fucking promise you the FBI and ATF would not go in there. But when people claiming to be Christian gather together to grow food and draw water from a well in the United States, it suddenly becomes a national emergency and a police crisis, all the way up to the president's office. I want you to think real hard about that, okay? And you guys know me. I'm not a huge Christian supporter. I'm born and raised Catholic, left that religion, okay? Not a whole lot of use for it. I think it's not much of a religion at all. But I do defend these people's right to live collectively as Christians, to pray together, to work together, to grow food together, and to live communally together. I absolutely support that. I think that might be actually one of the best and most positive examples of Christian living, right? And what are they doing? They're getting out of the Babylonian system, right? So there you go. A lot of colorful activity on the ranch. You got a brothel, an off-track betting, a guy who builds the ranch, his wife divorces him. Then you get the Sons of Gestapo, then you get the Mexican family, then you get the suicide. Then come John and Joyce Edmonds in 1997, June of 1997. So, quite a place he was moving into there. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.
At first glance, Stardust Ranch in Buckeye, Arizona looks like a peaceful plot of land, and its current residents, John and Joyce Edmonds, have lived there for over 2 decades. Their 4-bedroom house, nestled within 10 acres of scenic Rainbow Valley, seems like the ideal home for baby boomers seeking a cozy escape from big city life. So why are they so desperate to get away from it? This is where it gets weird. You see, according to John Edmonds, the main problem is aliens, the kind from outer space. John claims the ranch has been under constant assault by extraterrestrial invaders for years. He says the humanoid creatures are the same beings commonly referred to as greys by UFO enthusiasts. It's also a term used by reported victims of alien abduction, dating back to the testimonies of alleged UFO abductees Barney and Betty Hill in 1961. In fact, John claims the greys have repeatedly tried to abduct his wife, forcing him to stockpile weapons in order to defend their home against the terrifying attacks. He also claims to have killed up to 18 of the extraterrestrial invaders, most of them with a samurai sword. He also claims the aliens have established a series of portals around the ranch, which he says might enable the beings to transport themselves instantaneously. John says he once saw his wife being lifted into one of these portals, surrounded by a mysterious cone of light, but was able to save her by firing on the source of the light with a machine gun. When Edmonds first announced he would be putting the ranch up for sale, his original asking price was $1.5 million, which already seemed a bit steep considering appraisers had quoted a much lower value on the property. But after John was featured on Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures in 2016, the asking price almost immediately shot up to $5 million. As of today, there are no legitimate takers, but the bizarre storm of rumors, theories, and publicity has continued to build over the years, and Edmonds has become a celebrity among UFO enthusiasts, granting numerous interviews for TV and the web. Naturally, there's been a large amount of skepticism in the wake of Edmonds' claims. Even hardcore UFO believers have been wishing for more visual evidence, especially images of alien corpses. John claims the lack of forensic evidence is due to the greys' bodies instantly vanishing if you don't decapitate them and disconnect their antennae after they die. He says this solution has been too difficult to carry off in time to take photos or video afterwards. However, John has produced images of what he cites as bloodstains from one of these alleged kills. On other occasions, he has displayed strange wounds on his own body, which he claims were inflicted in one of his many battles with the greys. A very different conspiracy theory once surfaced, claiming Edmonds invented the alien story to cover another, darker secret. This idea likely originated with an episode of The Unbelievable Podcast, featuring excerpts from the Ghost Adventures interview with John's wife, Joyce. The hosts went on to speculate that John concocted the alien story to conceal a case of real-life domestic abuse. Word of the podcast eventually got back to John himself, but he dismissed it, saying the host's opinions had no real legitimacy, and authorities have produced no evidence to support that theory. The audio of Joyce Edmonds also reveals she has never actually seen her would-be abductors, but she's told reporters she believes her husband's story, and without supporting evidence to the contrary, the podcaster's claim is unfounded. While Stardust Ranch remains on the market today, it appears the story of John and Joyce Edmonds is not over. Is John's story simply a hoax to spike the value of the property? It's hard to confirm, though he claims to have received multiple cash offers. Is he simply delusional or a true believer? If he's right, we'll need to see incontrovertible evidence, and if the alleged attacks continue, hopefully Edmonds will have a chance to provide that proof. As for now, we have no definite answers, and the case remains open. If you have any information that might help solve the bizarre mystery of Stardust Ranch, contact us at theunsolved@dreadcentral.com. All sources will be kept anonymous.